A very good afternoon to all the learners, and a warm welcome to Dr. Harini Santanam. Uh, I would like to take this opportunity to give a brief introduction about Dr. Santanam. Dr. Harini is an environmental scientist by profession. Her academic career started with base in zoology, and after that, as I told you, is environmental scientist. So her interest in environment started since then, and her MSc degree in environmental science from Anna University, Chennai, followed by PhD in ecosystem modeling. She is now basically focused on her research in one of the important area, uh, land water human nexus from an ecosystem perspective, and she has been associated with ISA Bangalore from the last more than 5 years. She has more than 10 papers in different peer-reviewed journal, including also presented a lot of presentation in different national and international conferences. So with this brief introduction, I welcome you, Dr. Harini. Again, also thank you for giving us your valuable time and interact with our learners. Now, with this, over to you, Dr. Harini.
Thank you, Dr. Kuman. It's a pleasure to be here. A very good afternoon to all the participants of this postgraduate diploma in sustainability science course. It's a privilege to be here because IGNOU is known for its well-made syllabus and the far reach that it has across the country. And this is a very, very special program that ways because it is going to connect a lot of people across the nation on one of the most important topics of our times, which is sustainability science. So in this course today, I'm going to talk about water from the ecosystem perspective, its status, and as well as distribution. Moving on, I would like to first introduce what are the learning objectives for this module. So how I see it, this learning objective is that a holistic perspective must be shown of the ecological, the physiochemical status of water with respect towards distribution as well as the quality. So here we will try to understand what are the environmental, the hydrological characteristics of the water resources and how they impact our lives, the capability to derive interrelationships with biota, which forms the forefront of all our discussion on sustainability, and also the need for scientific and other frameworks to manage these water resources under an integrated resource model perspective. So moving on, this learning should help the students who also have projects to have some ideas on how to demonstrate skills from learning these topics as futuristic water practitioners, if not now, but even in the future. So this is a very important aspect that we are looking at in terms of the lectures that are given to you as well as the presentation. The idea should be like a bee which harnesses different parts of the honey to bring everything together in its hive. We are also going to look a bit about aquatic ecology, hydrology, biogeochemistry. What are the proxies or indicators which tell us how water itself is changing or the properties of these ecosystems are changing and hence the ecosystem services themselves, and put this all together in sort of a modeling perspective which leads to our realization of the targets for sustainability. So moving on, this first slide here is showing you the typical structure of an ecosystem. Now, what I want to focus on is that we should first be able to appreciate there are a specific structure that we see in front of us, and there are some functional aspects in terms of the processes that are happening. So first of all, you see there is structure. Structure of an aquatic ecosystem is very important to understand when we were talking about the water itself. So water, which is part of the biosphere, as you know, of the hydrosphere that it forms, is also part of the ecosphere or the ecosystem. So what happens when the ecosphere and the interactions within the ecosphere with specific respect to water is seen from a cycling point of view here, as you see, a cycle of both structure, processes, and transitions. So first let us take structure. Here you see a typical aquatic ecosystem has two important parts, the epilimnion or the part which is there on the top or the superficial layers up to which sunlight penetrates. And the bottom part is known as the hypolimnion or where there is no penetration of sunlight. So water usages typically are based on the differential characteristics which are developed at different parts of the ecosystem. So the first part, as you see, the epilimniotic part, it's very important to understand that producers or algae, which are the single-celled plant cells which live in the water, they are able to give the function for the top portion of the aquatic ecosystem. And that is where the dissolved characteristics, the characteristics of water itself become very, very important. And in the bottom, if you see, the water characteristics are quite different. The one aspect that differentiates between these are we have to understand in terms of the physiochemistry. One very important aspect is what is known as dissolved oxygen. So there is oxygen which is dissolved in the water, which is present in different concentrations at different parts of the water. And this particular characteristic gives the water its specific use or characterization, which we will look up in the further slides. So here you see there is a water system which is affiliated to the land system. And from the land system, there is an interaction that always happens. On the surface, you see from the land, there is always what is known as runoff or water which enters the aquatic ecosystems from the nearby land regions. And there is also the water which goes away from the water systems itself, that is known as the outflow. So another type of inflow that happens is through what we all know as precipitation or rainfall. This is the major type that adds most water to any aquatic ecosystem. And the one that removes water is known as evaporation. So these are the processes: runoff, evaporation, precipitation, and outflow. Along with this, there is a very important aspect of what are known as groundwater seepages. So we have what are known as infiltrated water or the water which reaches the bottom layers. We'll see about this eventually. That is also adding to the water in any aquatic ecosystem. So we started off the topic as water distribution and quality. But what we need to understand is this distribution and quality is a product of the site of where the ecosystem itself is located. And the biotic and abiotic components both constitute any water aquatic ecosystem. So the abiotic factors, if you see, are temperature, wind, waves if there are in the water, which cause the mixing, the currents, etc. These are all the abiotic factors or which constitute the non-living components of water. The living components of water are the microorganisms, especially the algae, the zooplankton, which are very, very minute animals, cells, and there are other fishes. There are secondary and tertiary consumers, which are basically the bigger fishes. And we also have other types of aquatic organisms which live in the water. So these form the biotic components. So there is always an integration and interaction between the biotic and the abiotic component, which gives the water its characteristic. So moving on, these are some examples to illustrate how these interrelationships happen. So let us first consider in the above diagram, which denotes the structure, let us take the example of a lake. You see the first diagram shows an isolated system. So in an isolated system, there are only two parts which are possible, two processes rather. One is the evaporation and another is the precipitation, which removes or adds water. So the hydrology or the water quality of this system will be quite unique to that very aspect. And also because the water ecosystem itself interacts with the geology or the geology or the land's characteristics of that area. The land use characteristics as well as the native geology both have an effect on what is the water quality in this lake. If you see the second lake, there is some sort of interaction here. For example, riverine discharges happen, and there is also an exchange with the sea. When these happen, there is a mixing of the water characteristics, the water from the rivers and water from the sea. So these mix with the water in the lake. So this gives a very distinct sort of a characteristic to this ecosystem. And finally, when lakes are also part of what are known as wetlands, where there is water logging, a different type of ecology results. So example for the isolated systems can be tanks or urban lakes. Examples for lakes with exchanges can be coastal lagoons or estuaries. And the lakes which are part of a wetland complex, they are mostly part of the marshlands or mangroves. So here I have also shown from the processes angle how the characteristics of water can be different, because one can be termed as oligotrophic, that is the water which has low nutrient concentrations and very low primary production. So what are nutrients? Nutrients, specially we refer to nutrients which are carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus. These are the macronutrients which we refer to and which control the characteristics of the water on a large scale. There are also what are known as micronutrients. For example, zinc, for example, molybdenum. All these are very trace or micronutrients which have specific function controlling the biotic functions of the water ecosystems. There are other systems which can be mesotrophic, where there is a moderate concentration of nutrients which are in dissolved state in the water. And the production, which in terms of primary production is in terms of the algal production, which take these nutrients and fix carbohydrates. So this is the major mechanism. This we call as primary production. The primary production is also moderate in mesotrophic ecosystems. If they are eutrophic or hypereutrophic systems, then there is excess amount of nutrients which are available, which control a different type of and give rise to a different type of ecology. So let us see, we have to understand that water bodies with restricted inlets or outlets are different from those where there is connection with, connection and flow of materials with other adjacent riverine or water aquatic ecosystems. And this changes are very consonant with the different time scales in which these processes happen. So we have to look at water in terms of its structure as well as its processes, and as well as in the terms of the gradients or the transformational quotient which occur when there is mixing of different waters. So the basic discussion that we had now is reveals itself in terms of what are known as trophic states. So trophic status of an ecosystem means that whether it is an oligotrophic, a mesotrophic, or a eutrophic or a hypoeutrophic, based on the amount of nutrients which are present. Where do these nutrients come from? They come from the exchanges with adjacent ecosystem, and they are also product of biological activity. So both put together give water its trophic status. And we have to study the exchanges with adjacent ecosystems to come out with what kind of trophic states are developed with respect to water. So why are trophic states important? Because this is what gives water its usability. So for what purpose will water be used for? So the usability comes from the trophic status that the ecosystem, the aquatic ecosystem gains as a product of its abiotic and biotic components. So now I would like to introduce you and complement the excellent syllabus that IGNOU has brought up with a few more important ecological concepts of forcing factors and proximate causes. So what are forcing factors? Forcing factors are simply those factors which cause a change in the ecosystem characteristic under normal conditions, so as well as altered states. So if, for example, under normal conditions, there is a presence of precipitation, temperature, wind, nutrients, these are all present even in normal conditions. So there is a normal exchange that is happening, as we saw, normal flow and normal processes which give rise to the water chemistry. But even under altered states, these factors still remain to be forcing factors which contribute to the biological productivity of the ecosystem. So these are called as forcing factors. The graph on your right side can show you what are the ultimate forcing factors, which we will come to in an instant. Before that, we have to understand another term, what is known as proximate causes. Proximate causes are those which bring upon an accelerated change or considerable alteration from the normal status of water. water ecosystems. For example, factors such as urbanization, factors such as mining, excessive land use or excessive agriculture, and alterations in the water course. All these cause a big change in the way water is distributed, used, and as well as its quality. So these are known as proximate causes. We are very much concerned with, I have highlighted water chemistry alteration as one of the very, very important factor, because this actually bites us, each one of us, at a very primal level, as because we are concerned when there is an alteration in water chemistry, immediately we see an effect in our own daily lives. So it's very important for us to understand what are the proximate causes and what are the forcing factors. So the ultimate impacts can be in change, in the terms of change in the periodic as or constant or aperiodic, even in the stable state or the normal state. For example, ecosystem destruction can happen due to excessive dredging or excessive runoff of pesticides and fertilizers, or excessive thermal pollution. So that can cause change in the hydrological regimes as such. They can cause change in the biotic species abundance and their richness, etc. And these are governed by what are known as subfactors. Examples of subfactors are acidification or siltation, which can be of short to moderate time scale. So they are known as subfactors. So these factors together govern how water is distributed and how it is used. So here, this table here gives the major anthropogenic factors which change the ambient or the stable states for riverine or running water ecosystems. For example, here you can see hydrology, siltation, acidification, toxic metals, organic pollution. All these we are familiar with, but these are the sub-factors which are governed by several proximate causes, resulting in both abiotic alteration as well as biotic implications. So I would share this table with you all for a closer look and open for discussions if any. Moving on to what is the important aspect of water usage. What determines how water is used? First thing that determines how water is used is its availability. So availability is determined by where it is distributed or how it is distributed. In terms of its distribution, we can study two different aspects of water distribution. One through the lens of hydrology. For example, we can study what is the occurrence, what is the availability, the transport, and the behavior in between atmosphere, hydrosphere, and also within the biosphere. So the science of the occurrence, transport, and behavior of water on the surface and below the ground, as well as with atmosphere, constitutes the study of its hydrology. Hydrology can also be studied under the lens of physical hydrology, eco-hydrology, hydrobiology, and very recently and very importantly, urban hydrology. In terms of hydraulics, this concerns the engineering aspects for managing the flow of water and its distribution. This is more an engineering field which deals with reservoir and dam engineering, having water distribution networks also, and to study how stormwater engineering and distribution can be effectively implemented. So first, let us start with hydrological cycle and its transformation. This diagram on your right shows what is the hydrological cycle typically be. First, it starts with an evaporation, which leads to condensation. Condensation leads to precipitation. Precipitation gives rise to runoff and infiltration. We are very familiar with this from several courses that we have already done in our lives. We are very familiar with the hydrological cycles. But what we have to understand is that there are three different things that are happening here. One is that it is structurally changing. This hydrological cycle structurally changes the way in which the water is present on Earth. Second, it functionally changes its availability, functionally alters how we use the water. And finally, the transformational changes in terms of phase transitions from solid to liquid to gas, that also determines the very different uses that we use water for. So the major reservoirs, if you see, are from rivers to ocean, ocean to atmosphere, and also infiltration into the ground. So if we see what is runoff and infiltration, let us talk about runoff. Runoff is mostly surface runoff or the water that is flowing over the ground. Runoff, it enters the major reservoirs as I mentioned here, rivers or streams, and subsequently the oceans. And runoff adds what is known as stream flow or the flow in small streams into the aquatic ecosystems. So stream flow itself is defined as the volume of the water per unit of time in a river or a stream. Okay. And infiltration is the process of soaking and entry of the water into the ground, which captures part of the runoff. So having understood these terms, we should also understand that there are different types of runoff. First runoff is the surface runoff. Surface runoff is the water that reaches the stream by flowing over the soil surface, as we understood. That's something also known as interflow or quick return flow. So this, once the upper layers receive the water, that is the soil layer, it seeps underneath. Okay, but they do not directly become groundwater. They can also return to the surface, which causes water logging and gives rise to marshlands, as we saw earlier. Or they can appear in streams and join together to form a bigger stream. So interflow can either contribute to groundwater slowly, but does not become groundwater. It has to be accumulated over a period of time, or it can contribute to stream flow. So there is another term called base flow, and that is the water that flows into the stream from the natural storages. We saw outflow, inflow, as well as outflow. So this is sort of an outflow which is contributed from the groundwater aspect. Aquifers are where the water is stored within the solid rocks or the geomorphic morphological units under the ground in the subsurface. So the water that is contribute from the groundwater in terms of its seepages, they contribute to add to what is known as stream flow. Those are known as base flows. There is also what is known as the direct runoff. Runoff is the water that enters a stream and contributes to flood. So you can imagine that the scale of operation here is different. The scale of direct runoff is much higher than the interflow or the quick return flow. And there is in the direct runoff, there will be a mixture of both surface runoff as well as the interflow. And finally, the part of the precipitation which gets stored in the vegetal cover or the vegetation, that is what is known as interception, and it does not contribute to the runoff. It is captured by the vegetation. So that part is known as the interception. So these are the different types of runoff that we come across. Now, if we take what is base flow and percolation. So a significant amount of the infiltrated water which remains on the land, it will become into streams or rivers. This volume is designated as groundwater flow or base flow. So an aquifer, as I mentioned, is an underground layer of water-bearing permeable rock systems or solid materials such as gravel, sand, or silt, which can store the fresh water for long periods of time. So they are our reservoirs, natural reservoirs. And the term that we come across as percolation, it is a part of the infiltrated water that seeps under the ground to the aquifers which store this water. And also infiltration and percolation, there is a slight difference. Infiltration is the water that seeps into the soil profile, which becomes the pore water. And percolation becomes what is known as soil moisture, or which is held for a longer period of time. So infiltration adds water through base flow, groundwater flow, and aquifer recharge. Whereas the surface availability in wells and springs, these remove water from our land. Okay, through wells or springs, we take water away from. So there has to be a balance between infiltration and the surface availability for the distribution to be uniform. So now comes the concept of what is known as a watershed. We have been talking about different types of runoff. All these processes happen together. They do not happen in isolation, which means that there is a place where all this water is stored, not only underground but also on the surface. But where is this place? How is this place formed? If you see the diagram on your right, you see two small hills, right? And there is a depression between both of them. Those two hills will form what are known as watershed boundaries. And the depression between them is where the water is stored. So the highest points, if we join together, there will be lots of such small peaks around in a place. All these places receive rainfall. Some of it runs away, some of it runs outwards, and some of it runs towards the depression. So water gets collected into this depression, and slowly small streams are formed. Those streams run and collect the water, deposit the water into the depression. And this is how a water system is formed. So here you can see if we join the peaks of all these elevated portions, we come up with what is known as the delineation of a watershed boundary. So we have delineated, or we have found the boundary where the water will be stored in the depression. And there will be an outlet because there will be a change in the elevation between these points. So there will be an inlet as well as an outlet, and the part where the stream flow starts to form, those are known as sub-watersheds. So thinking about the concept of watershed is very important, because whenever we are identifying reservoirs where water can be stored, we go to natural formation. Natural watershed boundaries are very important for us. And also it is very important from the urbanization point of view that we avoid building anything across these watershed boundaries. Because what happens in that case, we are blocking the entry of the water. And if we block the entry of the water, we are also blocking percolation, we are blocking runoff, then it results in massive floods. And this is what has been seen in different cities in different parts of the world. So coming back to our concept of watershed, we can define watershed as a bounded area of land in which water naturally drains towards the low-lying point. And a line that connects all the highest points in that area corresponds to the watershed boundary, which also directs where the water will flow and in what way it will flow. So flows are usually from the highest points towards the lowest points, and the highest points, they combine together to form streams or rivers within that area. And when they come to the lowest point, which is known as the watershed outlet. And water flow is usually hindered by the presence of depressions or basins. So if it is hindered, it accumulates there. And that is where our distributed water systems in the world originate from. So this can also be called by another name called as drainage area, sub area, basin, or a catchment area. So now we have understood what is a watershed and its components. We can move on to some other terms of interest which are connected to how distribution of water can be described. First thing is, we use what is known as a hydrograph to track the discharge, the velocity, and other property of water with respect to time. So this is expressed in terms of cubic meters per second. There's also another very important term you see here, which is known as peak discharge. A peak discharge is defined as the maximum discharge rate for a flood event or any given precipitation event. And this is also expressed as meter cubes per second. There's another term which is a little bit familiar to us by now, which is called a runoff. It is a part of the precipitation which appears as the stream flow, and it's expressed in terms of centimeters or inches. So which part of precipitation becomes stream flow is calculated as runoff. And there is something known as time of concentration. So we saw the concept of watershed and how over different periods of time, water surface or water runoff is collected in a depression or a basin. So it takes a long time, you can imagine, for a lake or any lacustrine ecosystem to be formed. Similarly, it takes a long time for water to seep from the aquifers and become the base flow and reach the aquatic ecosystem. So this groundwater as well as surface water has been formed over a long period of time, and this is actually considered in terms of time of concentration. That is hydraulically how water can move from the most distant point or the top point in the watershed to the lowest point or the watershed outlet. So it is expressed in hours. And it is also used to estimate how a peak discharge can help to accumulate water in a basin or a depression. Another term, very important term, is initial abstraction. That is, what is the part? It is the part of the precipitation before the surface runoff begins. Okay, so this is very important because this determines if, for example, initial abstraction is huge and the surface runoff does not happen at all, there is only accumulation, right? So if this happens, then we do not get enough water which is available to the biotic communities. If the initial abstraction is very less, it takes a long time for water to flow through and accumulate at different points in the ground. So this makes the cumulative water availability higher over more period of time. This also includes the interception or the water that is captured by the vegetation, the infiltration water, as well as the depression or the stored water. There is what is in hydrological terms called runoff curve number. So this curve number is an index or an indicator of the runoff potential from a specific combination of land cover, land use, and soil. So this is very important index for us because if the land cover is dense, widely vegetated, the interception part can be very high, which means there is very less infiltration taking place and very less runoff taking place. If the land use, for example, is influencing, suppose there are very terrific mined areas and the infiltration rates are huge in that case, but still they will not contribute to the base flow or they will not contribute to the infiltration. So which means that water will not be available for longer periods in time. It will accumulate, but it will also be removed as soon as it accumulates. And also the soil type, the soil characteristics that give rise to the runoff curve number because it influences in such a way, depends on its porosity or how much of water holding capacity it has. Finally, the term here is estimation of the channels by which the water is routed downstream through a valley or through a reservoir, that is known as flood routing. This is very important from water management point of view, as well as if there are natural flood routes available, it is easy to transport water from one place to another, and hence it will aid in better water distribution. So these are some basic terms which are concerned with water distribution characteristics which we need to be aware of. So there are numerical solutions which are used by hydrologists and hydraulics engineers to calculate runoff, peak discharge, retention time, or time of concentration. So these have both classical and modern approaches. Mostly classical approaches are followed, although they are very, very tedious. Modern approaches tend to use more of instrumentation facilities to track the routing and the accumulation, which is more a costlier affair. So wherever it is possible, it is best to merge both classical and modern approaches, but it is a very exhaustive field to intervene and understand how these water distribution networks can be established over a period of time. Each have their limitations and it is very, very region specific. This is because of the vast geomorphologies that we see in our country, and this is especially typical for the Indian scenario because India has very, very different geomorphologies and ontologies that it's very difficult to understand from from looking at the land use, land cover types, the management strategies, the way in which the population exerts its pressure. So it's all a very, very difficult, but it's not unsolvable rather. But we have to agree to certain limitations whenever we think about big distribution projects. And also many algorithms use numerical equations to solve the outputs, to consider the hydrograph, which gives what is the water availability at any given point in time. Very important part of it is what is known as watershed delineation, which we have seen in detail. Watershed delineation is a point-to-point integration. So it can be in terms of point-to-point is like if there are several streams flowing, they tend to form one stream. But in true reality, there are multiple streams which are forming. So we have second order and third order stream flows, which we have to consider when we are trying to come up with what is the water accumulation at any given point in time or given place. So it is important to consider this as single order, second order, and multiple order stream flows. So now going back to the water cycle, there are some interesting concepts that we have to understand. Can we identify what are the functional components here again? So structurally, we have the lakes, we have the rivers, we have the sea. So these are the structural components. We also have the clouds. So those are structural components. We also have the mountains. Those are structural components. These are structural parts of a water cycle. But what are the functional parts? Functional parts are partly the processes like the evaporation, the transpiration, or the precipitation, and partly they are the transformational portions. Like, for example, the ice melting into water and water becoming condensing into ice or turning into water vapor. So, these are the functional aspects. So, how do these structural and functional components give rise to what are known as ecosystem services of water? The main ecosystem service of water, as you know, ecosystem service is nothing but the service which is offered by any specific ecosystem. Here we are considering an aquatic ecosystem. So in terms of the services, we can also term it as ecosystem services of water. Water, the fundamental ecosystem service is it provides a habitat for life. Second ecosystem service, it is the biggest or the best possible solution ever, the universal solution, which where dissolved nutrients, dissolved gases, all these are present in multiple proportions and forms. So it also gives what it's also known as the elixir of life, or it gives a medium through which transformation of these nutrients take place. So that is another ecosystem service which it offers to the biotic components of an aquatic ecosystem or in the hydrosphere, which help them to survive. Third is that it, apart from giving habitat, apart from being a medium, it is also a transformational flow or an exchange medium, which tries to convert different components into from their native state to the dissolved state, and from dissolved state back to the native state. So why do we need to consider water and ecosystem services of aquatic ecosystems? We know that it is very, very important, but how do we do that? The first and the very maximum impact lies in how we deal with how we use the water. So the ecosystem services preservation starts with thinking, how do we use the water? Let us take a look at how the distribution is across the globe. First, we have to understand that the annual global runoff, considering all the equations that we have already seen, the estimation of runoff that we have discussed, it turns out that there is 40,700 kilometer cubes, which are accounting for the net precipitation on land. This turns into flood or stream flow. And only 1/5 of this occurs in the remote geographic regions where it is commercially, they are non-viable, which means that it is not economically useful to the biotic components from the human perspective for the human beings. Only 31% of the runoff is being accessed currently by the humans, which contribute to about 12,617 kilometer cube. You can appreciate that out of 40,000, approximately 40,000 kilometer cube, we are using only about 13,000 kilometer cube approximately. And this water is what is known as the accessible water, which is available to us. And if the number of dams or flood storage units increase, the amount of water, accessible water, can also increase. However, the accessible runoff cannot move beyond 10% in the next 30 years. This is a modeling estimate which has just been modeled and reported by Postel et al. In 1996. And this still holds true because this claim can only account for humans appropriating 70% of the accessible runoff, which means that we are this 13,000 kilometer cube that we are saying will be pushed way up, and we will be able to access 70% of the accessible runoff. And the population growth, which is a major forcing factor or an ultimate forcing factor you can call, which is also the proximate cause. So a factor can be a proximate cause as well as a forcing factor. In the same period, it's assumed to grow by approximately 35%, which is a huge growth. And every percentage of this human population will require and demand and place stress on the water resources. So it's going to be a huge challenge. So let us also now look at distribution in terms of water stress. Now on the right hand side, you have a diagram which shows where the water is distributed. 97.5% of the water on earth is found in oceans. Only 2.5% of this is fresh water. And about 68.9% constitutes the water in the form of ice or the glaciers. The 2.5% of fresh water is distributed in different ways. 30% of this 2.5% is found as groundwaters, which is the maximum component. Others are distributed in forms of lakes, marshes, streams, rivers, as atmospheric water, as biological water, and as chemical water. So these totally account for this 2.5%. So now you can see and appreciate that only the 2.5% available fresh water is what is accessible water available to us. So, but this is never enough. So this availability in any region is reflected by what is the stress on these resources. This is what is known as water stress index, which is based on the calculation of the minimum per capita water requirement in a given geographic region. If an area has to be water stressed, its annual per capita availability of water should be below 1,700 cubic meters. If a scenario exists where the availability reduces below 1,000 cubic meters, then the situation is termed as water scarcity or water scarce situation. And finally, absolute scarcity occurs when the availability of water goes below 500 cubic meters. So this was the old estimate. Even in the revised estimate, we can see that the revised estimate comes from actually over research. We have come up with several socio-economic pathways and how the socio-economic pathways increase or decrease the demand of water even when the supply of water is less. So in that ways, we calculate the present for the present condition and in the next 20-30 years, what are the revised estimates of water according to their demand. So for any adequate living standards, it is estimated that the renewable water supply should be at least 2000 meter cube per person per year, which means that in a year, a person will require 2000 cubic meters of water. If the water availability is between 1000 and 2000 cubic meter per capita per annum per person, then the situation can be termed as water stress. So if 2000 is available, there is no water stress. If it is available between 1000 and 2000, the situation is called as water stress. If it is less than 500 meter cube per person per year, it can be termed as water scarce. Earlier, you remember 5000 meter per cube was declared as absolute scarcity. But now we have to agree that at least if 500 meter cube per person is available, we can still call it water scarce, because that is how the distribution of water has gone down in the years and availability has gone down. So we have to make our calculations very strict. And the revised estimate says that under normal conditions, 7,000 meter cube per person per year should be available, which is not the truth. But if we use it properly, there can be enough water for at least 3 times the present population. This is a very, very important slide. If you see, during 1995, what is the situation of fresh water in the world, and in 2025, how it is projected to change. So water withdrawal, as you can see, there are the blue boxes show low water withdrawal. The brown, the orange rather, orange and the cream colors shades show higher water withdrawal. So if you can see, India was there in the cream shaded portion in 1995, but it is projected to change to over 40% water withdrawal rates of the total available water to us in 2025, which is very, very near. We are already in 2022, and this was released in 2000 year, in the year 2000. And earlier, actually, 1996, this was acknowledged and released in 2000, which makes it very, very, very alarming to us. So you can see that 2/3 of the world population is estimated to be under water stressed condition by 2025, which means it can be below 500, which means there is an absolute scarcity or a water scarce situation, or between 1000 and 2000 where there is water scarcity. So, and 3 billion people will be affected by 2025 because of the water scarce situation. So what we can see here is that there is a severe mismatch between the regions where there are large populations, for example, Africa, India, China, the regions where there are which is highly populated, the availability of fresh water is lesser. But on the global scale, if you see places which are sparsely populated, water resources may be higher. So there is an uneven mismatch between the regions of large population and the availability of fresh water on a global scale. So if we move on to what is the projected water use sector wise, now we have we have an understanding of water, its uses and its distribution. Now we are thinking about how sector wise or demand wise water can be used actually and consumed. So what is the demand per sector? The major sector comes from agriculture, next followed by the domestic demand, the industries come next, and then storage reservoirs. Here you can see very, very clearly that the agricultural sector is slated to increase over a period of time. There can never be a decrease, although the increase is very, very, very steep. For example, withdrawal, if even within the green bars that you see on the left hand side, the first graph, there are two green bars, the light green and the dark green. The light green shows the increase in the consumption over time, and the dark green shows the withdrawal. So now the withdrawal peaks more than the consumption. Even with the assessment of present conditions as well as in the forecasts through modeling, it is very clear that withdrawal outweighs the consumption, which means that there is so much water loss that is happening in between. So we have to understand that supply can be constant, supply can even be made even at some point in time. But if that does not translate into water loss, we are very much able to manage or sustain the water resources for a longer period in time. So if we come to the graph of domestic water usage, here you see that the domestic water consumption is more in countries, it is 6 times more rather than the other in the developed countries than in the developing countries, which means that more of water loss is happening in areas where more water is available, and less water loss is happening in areas where there is less availability or scarcity of water, which means again there is a problem of uneven distribution of water. Here you see in 2025 again, withdrawal and consumption, there is a huge change. While the consumption can also not increase so much, the withdrawal rates will exceed. This is what is projected for even for domestic scenario. In that scenario, we can imagine how much of water loss is happening. In the industrial side also, there is a huge change between the withdrawal and consumption, but the status quo is that it is much below, or rather projected to be much below the agricultural and the domestic demand. Even with the increase in the industrialization, we always blame anthropogenic urbanization stressors such as urbanization or industrialization for more water shortage, but that is not true. The point is that the loss in water should be minimized in every other sector, including agricultural, domestic, and industrial. And the reservoir capacity, the decrease in the reservoir capacity will occur due to evaporation. See, you can see that in the last graph, the projected rate of evaporation shoots up in 2025, and there has been a gradual increase over the years, which means that there is more heat stress that the land develops, which translates into more water loss through evaporation. So this graph actually demonstrates to us that whatever be the sector-wise demand, water is available, but its use is mostly unsustainable. So if we see in 2000, this was the scenario. With respect to India, you can see that the percentage of withdrawal was pretty huge, 79 to 100%. And this has not changed over the period of time in the last 21 years. It has remained a constant. And the increase has been that the percentage increase is that it's maximum to 100% water is being withdrawn in India. So the scenario is that there are billion people to whom the food availability and water availability should be satisfied. So to meet also the expanding industrial growth, we have to take more and more fresh water. But withdrawal and consumption should be balanced. And this is very, very important at present. If we move on to another aspect which determines how the water is being used, it is actually, one is availability as we saw, and second is the use. From the use point of view, how much of water quality gets changed or altered, as I explained before. So it's not just how much more water we are consuming, but how much pollution we are adding to the water. This is a very, very important aspect if we see it from the sustainability point of view. See, even if we minimize the water loss and make more water available, but if we still pollute it, do you think we will be able to use it? No. So we have to have two multiple perspectives on this. One perspective is that we have to reasonably extract water. Second perspective is that we should not pollute water. So where does the pollution of water happen? First, from the domestic point of view, use of soaps, detergent, chemicals, they lead to untreated municipal sewage, and that can pollute the water. Another ways is from the runoff from the agricultural fields, which carry harmful pesticides and fertilizers, which also add to the chemical properties of water, which alter its chemical properties to an extent that it's not retrievable. Also, if the industrial wastes are untreated, they also find their way into the water and pollute the water. As also smoke from the exhausts which go into the atmosphere, but they are turned down as acid rain and they reach the water, altering the natural water chemistry. So all these pose big challenges to sustainability of water. So the sustainability aspect of water is a three-part problem, in my opinion. First is that there is a greater and increasing demand for fresh water, which needs to be, which needs to be addressed. Second point is that they are being polluted and making them unfit for any sort of consumption. And third is that there is an improper and uneven access to the water between different categories of the population. So it is a social, economic, and ecological problem, a three-part problem, which pertains to availability versus use versus sustainability of water ecosystem. If you see the projection for India here, this graph very clearly shows that the water scarcity, see there are the three lines actually, the stress, scarcity, and absolute scarcity. I am actually alarmed to see that both the blue and the red lines, which correspond to total availability of water and actual availability of water, dips as we go down to the years 2041, dips very much down below the scarcity level. There's still time that we can regain up to certain extent, but if it becomes a water stress to water scarce to absolute scarce, then it becomes very difficult to retrieve. So in this connection, you can see that there are 2 points of interest with respect to India, which has to be addressed if water sustainability is to be addressed. First is that India constitutes 1/6 of the world's population. So for the increasing number of population, how best to use water in a sustained fashion without using too much of water, that is minimizing water loss, as well as using it in the correct way or unpolluted water. And also India's resources constitute only 1/25 of the global freshwater resources. We have to keep this in mind. because if we don't address this point, we will be running out of water in future and there will be nobody to supply water to us. We will run out of all the resources that are present or accessible to us, which provide the accessible water to us for our use. So the core principles, if we consider water and sustainability, are: first, we have to ensure that there is safe and affordable drinking water available to the population, which can use it for sanitation and hygiene, for their hygiene. The improvement of water quality is very much a concern here, because that will effectively help to use the water in a safe and affordable way, as well as for sanitary purposes. So wastewater treatment and safe water reuse must be promoted at all levels, and increasing the water use efficiency by minimizing the water losses. That is very important and core to water distribution principles in the country. What we are looking up is a term called integrated water resources management, which takes all the 4 or 5 points that we discussed earlier into its under its umbrella, and tries to tell us there is a specific water, please use it judiciously and in the proper way without polluting it. Further, we also look at it from different policy aspects. One aspect is how transboundary cooperation is very necessary. How sharing of waters between states and between countries is very, very essential, because India has only 1 by 25th of the global water resources and we might run out of water. So we have to now plan for sustainable water supply over the coming years. So transboundary cooperation is very, very important from the policy aspect, as also protecting and restoring our own water ecosystems. Finally, the expansion of water and sanitation concepts can only happen if there is public participatory practices. So public-private partnership, or PPP, forms a very core principle of sustainability of water. So we have to look at it from the distribution aspect as well as preserving the water quality, both aspects. PPP, or local participation, public participatory processes, are very important. So now I just show that there are two different aspects or themes under which sustainability is addressed globally. These are part of what are known as the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals which are adopted in the year 2015, which gives a target for each country to adopt to retain sustainability in every sphere of activity. Of these, Sustainable Development Goals number 6 and Sustainable Development Goal number 14 correspond to judicious use of water and aquatic ecosystems. So, for example, SDG 6 says that clean water and sanitation is the main thing. We have to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, which forms a major part of our discussion today. There is also another theme, SDG 14, which corresponds to life below water, which gives targets to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, the seas, and the marine resources. So now we understand that water is at the core of the societal development. And if we need to progress in every sphere, from industrial, agricultural, consumption, food management to domestic purposes, we have to use water sustainably. With this, I thank you all for your attention today. I have covered different aspects of use and distribution today from the ecosystem perspective. I will move on to different aspects of water quality, actual water quality, and how they influence or impact the water usage scenarios in the next lecture. Thank you so much.